I wanted to include this little podcast here just to raise again some issues with the way the brain has evolved, behavior, the complications associated with those, including how our decision-making system have become more efficient in by some measures, but much less robust. So let's start with this paper that looks at the signatures, physiological signatures associated with people who suffer from a pathological social withdrawal disorder called hikikomori disease, diagnosed in Japan, of course, and then found elsewhere, and even argued to be spreading. There's a very strong wind noise here that I cannot do anything about other than seal myself in. It's the monsoon, and somehow it rained like hell all night, and during the day it's just windy. Really strong winds. Okay, so without going into these details, the paper did good research on taking a control group of healthy people and a group of people who were suffering from hikikomori case, diagnosed properly, but they were not on medication. So the idea was to look for differences in things like psychiatry data, but also plasma and blood biochemical tests to show that there are biomarkers in the blood for people who suffer from hikikomori. What is the point? The point is that humans now suffer various kinds of disorders like depression, bipolar disorder, hikikomori, social withdrawal, etc. And there is a group that argues that it's all psychological, but there is a group that argues that these are physiological, that there is actually a difference in the brain wiring, in the blood biomarkers, and so on. That helps with medication and treatment, of course, but it also tells us that as brain has grown in size and become sophisticated and efficient, maybe there are prices to be paid with that. This short report in Nature shows that when they measured neuronal activities between monkeys and humans, they found that the part of the decision that goes on in the amygdala, or the so-called limbic system, which is basically the emotional analysis done. So amygdala is something that's like amygdala is basically comes from word almond. It has two halves, left part, right part. There are lots of details. It's what converts physical experiences into emotional response, and it's argued that evolutionarily we carry historical baggage of our response to a snake and fire versus sugar, for example. So even if a baby is shown a fire or snake which is it has never seen before, it will recoil and there is a fear response, whereas sugar, which is also very bad for us, we have no fear response to it. We consume sugar. I'm just using a vague example, but this study showed that higher primates, which have sophisticated, complicated brains, can make efficient decisions which happen in the rational part, cortical part, or the limbic part, the amygdala, and humans are less robust but more efficient. What does it mean? We use multiple pieces of evidence to make decisions. So if a monkey sees a tiger, it will run because it doesn't have any other information that it has to consider, whereas humans usually consider multiple pieces of evidence, and the decision may be efficient but not robust. You may get eaten by the tiger, okay, some such thing. But this fear response also leads to how humans are responding to climate change, for example. So if we look at all the animals, or some of the animals which have fear response, a circuitry of amygdala that allows us to respond to fear. So humans, of course, here, lizards, pigeons, cats, fish, rats, snail, rabbit, dog, macaque, and baboon, and people have compared amygdalas of the dogs and cats. For example, cats are solitary animals and very careful. Dogs are social animals and kind of sloppy in the way they drink and they do things. So there is a relation between post-traumatic stress syndrome and the amygdala, so amygdala gets affected by those sorts of things and so on. But ultimately, every decision we make comes down to what people like Jonathan Haidt and Dan and Chip Heath call the elephant and the rider paradigm or metaphor, where you can think of the brain as having a emotional elephant part and a rational rider part. So the rider loves to contemplate and analyze, doing so with a negative bias, which means we give more weight to negative news and negative everything than positive news and positive gains. If you lose $5, you'll be much sadder than if you just find $10. So these are kind of the issues. So they are almost always the rider is almost always focusing on problems rather than solutions. The rider is frustrated by uncertainty and easily exhausted. So these directly translate to how we respond to the creeping just landscape amnesia and creeping normalcy are the terms introduced by Jared Diamond about how a frog responds to slowly warming water versus boiling water. So Ryder tends to rationalize and take the see and wait and see attitude and can spin the wheels rationalizing without taking decision, whereas the so that's the rational mind, typified by the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain that looks for patterns, makes plans, predicts the future, monitors the self, and attempts to distinguish between and suppress animal instinct. Okay, so if you look at the emotional part, the elephant is easily spooked and hates doing things with no immediate benefit, instant gratification. It is stubborn, needs reassurance, and is quickly demoralized, but is powerful, tireless, and difficult to actively direct. So this is the amygdala that's responding. So this corresponds to the emotional mind, the limbic brain, typified by the amygdala, the root of fear and trigger of the body's stress response. Fight or flight versus rest and nest or rest and digest. Negative emotion has a narrowing effect on range of thought. Positive emotion allows the mind to wander creatively. Okay, so finally the path that is chosen, let's say human beings in response to climate, even when the rider and the elephant cooperate, they must know what direction to head. Without a clear vision of the destination, change will not happen. The elephant tends to follow the path of least resistance. Once the path is clear, it moves, has high inertia, and it will take the path of least resistance, especially when the goal is clear and the outcome is clear. This corresponds to the environment. External stimuli make up the world that the mind consciously and unconsciously interprets and reacts to. Forces like convenience, distraction, and cognitive biases play a significant role in directing behavior. So this is just a kind of a brief introduction to the complications of the human brain along the way. It has gotten much more efficient but less robust in the sense of making decisions in response to cues. This is what leads to climate cues, climate warnings, alarms, and later on in the last chapter we will look at this more at this idea of creeping normalcy and landscape amnesia, which Jared Diamond argues has led to civilizations going extinct in the past. And we will also debate this point a little bit, that not everybody agrees that there is actually collapse of civilizations, that they just decline and get merged, move away, or decline away, as opposed to collapse. So what do we do with this? Basically, to keep in mind how the behavior evolved, how brain has evolved, and how there is a feedback between them is now interacting with how we are affecting climate and how we are responding to the alarms from the climate our environment due to the perturbations that we created, and how we take decisions about climate. So we will see cultural differences in the way climate change, environmental benefits, cultural ecosystem services, non-commercial, non-market goods provided by nature are viewed in different cultures, and how they value pro-environmental behavior and its impacts on well-being, right? So this rider and elephant argument fits into that. It's a real thing, and it also of course translates into politics, conservatives versus liberals, people who believe in conspiracy theories and who don't believe in it, and so on, and so gets into lots of details. But we should keep in mind that human brain is complicated. It can do wonders, it can do amazing things, innovate stunningly amazing things, but it is at some level bound by this elephant and rider paradigm, or amygdala, limbic brain, and the rational brain. And to make a decision, it needs a certain set of parameters before the rider and the elephant can move in the same direction. Okay, so let me leave it here.